There you go, Abhijit. You can start.
Okay, so just a recap of what we have done till now. So far in certification, we have been discussing about the box certification, which is incomplete. And then we looked at the MILP solvers and how to use box to speed up the MILP. And then we looked at the zonotope in the previous session. And the zonotope is another kind of a symbolic region, which is exact for affine transformation. But again, in case of ReLU, they approximate. And so it's an incomplete method. And in today's session, we'll be discussing about another symbolic region, which they call it deep poly. So in their paper, they refer the zonotope as deep zono and polytope as deep poly, because even though these regions are pretty popular, but they kind of incorporated these regions into the neural network context. And that's why they call it deep zono or deep poly. So today's session will be about deep poly. And if you have followed the zonotope session properly, then this will be a very similar session with some modifications, which we'll be discussing in future slides. So yeah, these are some kind of convex approximations. So we discussed about box, we discussed about zonotope. So ideally, what we want to achieve is some kind of polyhedra, which is a very precise shape for approximating the inputs. But then these are very expensive because there are too many constraints that we have to define. And that's why we look for some scalable shapes, and we are exploring box, zonotope, and now we'll be looking at polytope. So so a deep poly, so as like we have seen in other regions also, whenever we talk about a shape, we talk about how we define that shape, and then later we discuss about the transformations. So in deep poly, so there are four constraints, and with the help of these four constraints, you define that shape. So there are interval constraint and relational constraint. So interval constraint are just bound, one upper bound and one lower bound. And for relational constraint, you have some lower relational constraint and upper relational constraint. And this upper and lower constraints are of some affine form, which is given by this expression. So moving forward, so deep poly is a kind of limited version of polyhedra, polytope, and we are not moving towards that because they are not scalable. So we are finding some way in which we can scale the things as well as they are precise. And as in the case of zonotope, this deep poly also captures the affine transformation precisely, but it loses precision in case of ReLU. And as in the case of other shapes also, we have to define the custom transformers for ReLU, sigmoid, max pool, and tanh. And like in previous session, we haven't discussed about how are we going to define the transformers for sigmoid or tanh. But if you're interested, you can refer the paper. It's almost similar like how you define a ReLU and how you approximate a ReLU. So it's almost similar. But if you can refer the paper if you are interested. So moving forward, we'll be again coming back to this kind of neural network, a very simple one, to understand about the deep poly. So just looking back at like how the box relaxation and how box transformation worked. So we had some input, we had the bounds on each of the neurons, x1 and x2, and then we propagated the bounds, and then we had some bounds on the output x11 and x12. And if we want that our model should be robust, then what we want is that the x11 should be always greater than x12. But when we were using box, because it was imprecise, we were not getting suitable results. As you can see here, like the lower bound of x11 is greater than the upper bound of x12. So the certification with box fails. And one major reason for it was that it was not able to capture the relational constraints. So as I have discussed in the previous session, so even though we have bounds here, we so so there is something that we have bounds, but also one important thing that we also want to understand is that whether the bounds can happen at the same time. And this is what we were doing with Zonotope, where we had some error terms that was capturing the relationship between the different neurons. So so in case of Zonotope, we overcame this shortcoming, and we had relations between neurons, and hence we got a better performance. So specifically talking about deep poly, the deep poly is favorable over Zonotope as in the case of ReLU. In affine transformation, they are similar, they are exact, but this becomes more powerful when it comes to ReLU. And we will be discussing about that in future slides. So as we have discussed, to define deep poly, we need 4 constraints. So here, like if you look at the first layer, we have x1 and x2, and we have the bounds, and we define the region for each neuron like this. So the lower bound is -1, the upper bound is +1, and we are similarly defining the upper and lower bounds like this. So it's pretty trivial. And even if you look forward at the next layer, like when we have x3 and x4, so the x3 is basically x1 plus x2, and since x3 is equal to x1 and x2, we are defining it as upper and lower bound in this case, because when you define it in this way, you are essentially saying that x3 is equals to x1 and x2. And with this relation and substituting the values of x1 and x2 from here, you get the bounds for x3 and x4. So it's pretty trivial, and we have been doing this a lot in previous sessions also. And now the first question that may come across your mind is like, if x3 is equals to x1 and x2, why are we just complicating things and introducing more constraints? Why can't we just introduce x3 is equals to x1 and x2, and we'll be done with 3 constraints instead of 4? But once we get to the ReLU transformations, the things will get more clear. And I feel most of the time, the intuition behind forming a new symbolic region is the ReLU transformation, because that is the case where we are losing the precision. So whenever we try to come up with a better shape for ReLU transformation, we kind of come back and define that shape for affine transformation too. So let's move forward and look at affine transformation a bit more. But I think, like, let's first switch to ReLU activation. And once you get an idea about the transformation for activation functions, you will be more used to the deep poly. So as we have seen previously, for even in the case of the MILP formulations or Zonotope, we had 3 conditions for ReLU transformation. One is strictly negative, one is strictly positive, and other one was crossing ReLU. So, and we have discussed it many times. When the upper bound is less than 0, then we make everything 0, because there is no possibility that the values of that neuron will be greater than 0. So we make everything 0 here. And similarly, the exact opposite case, when we have strictly positive, that is the lower bound of that neuron is greater than 0, then we take it as it is, like my upper and lower relational constraints will be equal to x, and my lower bound will be my lower bound, and upper bound will be my upper bound, as we have stated earlier. And the challenge comes when it comes to the crossing ReLU case. So just to recall, so we are just talking about this thing. So when I'm in this region, I'm good. When I'm in this region, I'm good. But if suppose I have a neuron which have bounds like this, where lower bound is less than 0 and upper bound is greater than 0, then we have to define this shape. So if we are completely in this region, then we are all good. So we just define the y is equals to x, and we don't have to work a lot with the transformations. So now look at the challenging part. So before that, let's recall like whatever we know till now. So we know ReLU is like this, and in box transformations, we looked ReLU like this. And even in the previous session, the professor has raised a point regarding a shape like this, which will be much precise and which will be much precise. But then obviously we have a scalability issue here because we need to define more constraints. And in the previous sessions, we looked at the deep Z, which is the deep Zono formulation, in which we defined a ReLU transformation for the zonotope shape. So we defined the slopes and we defined the shapes. And I think this kind of work is also covered in a parallel research as stated in these papers. But I have referred only this paper. But I think this is something worth to look at other papers also, just to understand like how to get to the same point using different approaches. But in short, we looked at some of the transformations, and we kind of concluded that even if this is the best one that we can get, but we have to limit ourselves to this one because this is scalable and this is much better than the box one. But now, as I even told in the last session, but we could do something like this. And this one is quite similar. And these are the shapes that is defined by the deep poly. And it is defined in this paper. So in this, as similar to the zonotope, you can define this shape with two constraints, which is the constraint for this line and constraint for this line. And this is why, if you think about it again, we have defined the affine transformations like this. Affine transformation using relational constraints, because at the end we wanted to define a ReLU transformation by using this shape, and to define this shape we need to have these two constraints. So that is, my neuron should be less than some relational constraint and greater than this relational constraint. And this was our motivation for defining the deep zono. And similarly, in this case, you have similar upper and lower relational constraints. So this was our broad motivation behind defining ReLU transformation with respect to deep poly. If I'm going fast, you can stop me and like you can ask me any questions. But I think we have kind of discussed these things over and over again. But whenever if you feel something, you can always raise your doubt. So now let's look at the ReLU transformation in depth. So in this layer where you have x3 and x4, you got these constraints using the affine transformation. And now what we are going to do is we are going to define x5 and x6 using ReLU transformation. And just a point to note here that we are defining this x5 and x6 using the pointwise taking one neuron at a time, because in case of zonotope, we have seen that even though we were taking one neuron at a time, if we can take multiple neurons, our results will be much better, because at the end we know that these neurons are related to each other in case of abstract interpretation context. So if we can capture the relationships, then we'll be getting much better results. But at this point of time, we are just taking pointwise ReLU transformation. So x5 will be formulated with the help of only x3. So now let's look forward, and we just have to now define the slopes here. So we have seen like how to define the slope in the previous session. So essentially this line has a slope and which is equals to ux times ux plus lx. So ux in this case is, so this is x3. So my ux will be 2, and this length essentially will be 2 minus of minus 2, which is 4. So this line has a slope of 2 by 4, which is 0.5, which you have here. And essentially you are shifting this line upwards here, because this this line is the line which passes through origin and has a slope of 0.5, and you have to shift it upwards, and this height is equal to the slope times this length, which is 0.2 0.5 times 2, which is equals to 1. So this is how you get your upper relational constraint for xy, and for the lower relational constraint, it is pretty evident from this region that it is 0. So xy is greater than 0 and xy is less than 0.5 times x3 plus x1. And through this, you can find the lower and upper bound for xy. So the lower bound is pretty evident, it will be 0, and the upper bound will be the upper bound for x3 times 0.5, which is 2 times 0.5, which is 1, and plus 1, that is 2. So we have got upper bound for xy2. And similarly, we can do the same thing for x6, and we'll be done with our ReLU transformation for deep poly region. So all these things are pretty similar to what we have done in Zonotope. It's just that we are exploring a better shape in order to like lose less precision. And again, we cannot compare these regions because we don't know what kind of points are there in these regions. But I think they have stated that in paper 2 and in practice also, since we cannot guarantee it is true, but then in practice, the one having lesser area performs better. So ideally, while designing this kind of models, we can take regions that have lesser area. So area can be a good heuristic in practical scenarios, but in theoretically, we cannot guarantee that one shape is better than another. I think it's pretty obvious also, because if suppose I have box which has 100 points, I have Zonotope which has around, because Zonotope is a smaller region and much precise regions, it has 50 points. And if suppose my deep poly has 50 points, if Zonotope has 70 points and my deep poly has 50 points, then there are more chances that there will be more spurious points in box, because in general, there are more points in the box. So, so in practice, the deep poly performs better than Zonotope and box, obviously. So this is a good transformation. But in case of deep poly, there is another interesting thing that happened. And this thing was kind of raised by Anubhav in like second lecture or third lecture, where he asked about back propagating or back substituting to get a better region. So this is what exactly we do in deep poly transformation. So now we have calculated till this layer. So xy and x3, xy and x6, and we got this through the ReLU transformation. And now let's move towards the next layer. And suppose I have some neuron next layer, which is x7. And x7 is xy plus x6 plus minus a bias of 0.5. So now to calculate the lower and upper bound for x7, ideally you will just substitute the lower and upper bound for xy and x6 from here, and you will get that bound. So the lower bound will be minus 0.5 because xy and x6 is 0, 0 for lower bound, and for upper bound xy and x6 is 2, 2. So 2 plus 2 minus 0.5 gives me 3.5 for the upper bound of U7. So this works well, but then the thing is we are losing precision here. And interesting observation, and if you think about it, it's pretty intuitive also. If we back substitute it, and by back substitution, what I mean is that, so what we are trying to do here is that we have x7 is equals to x5 plus x6 minus 0.5. So to find the bounds on x7, I want to substitute the bounds of x5 and x6, because the x5 and x6, I got the values for the bounds of x5 and x6 through the ReLU transformations. and I lost some precision in that transformation, in that process. So what I will do is that I won't use x5 and x6, but rather what I will do is that I will substitute the x5 as 0.5 x3 plus x1 and x6 as 0.5 times x4 plus x1 here. And I'll get a new expression in terms of x3 and x4. And I can again back substitute x3 and x4 in terms of x1 and x2. So x3 is x1 plus x2, which I'm doing here. And x4 is x1 minus x2, which I'm doing here. So essentially what you are doing here is that you got some expression for x7 in terms of x5 and x6, but then the expression is fine, but when you're going to find bounds on x7, when you try to find bounds on x7 using x5 and x6, they will give you imprecise result just because this x5 and x6 are based on the ReLU transformation, and we lost some precision there. So you're just going back and looking at like how far I can go and look what was my exact bounds are. So when you look back and when you back substitute, and ideally, like when you want to get the most precise result, you would love to go back to the first layer and substitute the bounds from there, but then that is not feasible. And that is why in practice, in the code, they like go back around 2 to 3 layers back, and then they substitute the bounds from there. So in this case, we went back 2 layers, and then now we have the expression for x7 in terms of x.
Can I ask a question, Abhijit?
Yes. Yes.
So what would be a constraint of propagating back? So let's say this is a smaller network, right? If you have a longer network, or if you have a deeper network, what would be the constraints or limitations of propagating back to, let's say, the first layer? What are the issues associated with doing that?
Memory won't be an issue here, because at the end you are keeping this bounds with you, because at the end you have the shapes with you. So memory won't be an issue to store these numbers. But then if you're going back and substituting the results, then yes.
No, go ahead.
Yes. So if you're going back, then you also have to look at the time complexity, because to calculate the bound for one of the neuron, you have to go back, and when you're going back, it depends on the number of neurons you have in each layer and the number of layers you have. So the thing is, like, you will need more time. I don't think about, I can't think about.
Have they talked about time complexity, and have they come up with some sort of it's an order number of neurons times number of layers? Have they come up with some sort of complexity?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, here you go. Okay.
So ideally what they're saying is, so W max is the max number of neurons in any layer, and L is the number of layers that you have. So if you are trying to find bound for one of the neuron, so what you are doing is, like, you are going back. So essentially for one neuron, you will be looking at each neuron in all the previous layers.
That's correct.
So,
yes.
So that is W cross L. And
right.
For that layer, you will be looking at each of the neuron, right? So these are the neurons in the previous layer.
Right.
And I have to I have to compute similar bounds for all the neurons in my current layer. So that is one W cross W cross W.
Right.
And W is the worst case. Yeah.
Okay, good. Makes sense.
Right. So if you back substitute it, and so you will get a much precise bound, and you will see here that when you substitute the values for x1 and x2, you will get something you will get 2.5 as a upper bound. And in the previous case, we had 3.5. So this is really an interesting thing because not only we are making our affine transformation precise, but we are also making our ReLU transformation precise. Because if you look at ReLU transformation, essentially the area that I will be having depends on my lower and upper bound. And this lower and upper bound is dependent upon my neurons in the previous layer. So if my bounds are precise, so I will be having a shape like this, which has a smaller area. Because now instead of -2 and 2, if suppose I got through back substitution, I got a new bound like -1 and 1, then I will be having a much smaller area, and that will be a more precise result. So not only the back substitution favors the affine transformation, but it also favors ReLU. And in general, it boosts the performance a lot. And also the author has also talked about like using MILP formulations. So what he was saying that we can give all these constraints to the optimization solver, and the solver will give us the bounds for L and U, and it will give us the exact bounds because MILP is a complete method. But then what he said that in practice, anything more than back substitution is not helping you in your result. So back substitution in practice works really great, and anything top of that may not help you a lot, and you will be spending a lot of time doing or working with complete methods.
So just a question on this point. When you said optimization, can you tell me a little bit more in terms of how that optimization problem looks like? What is the objective function there?
Okay, objective function. I have to think about
Okay,
it.
that's fine. No, so think on those lines, because what you mentioned is something very interesting, right? If you look at the paper by Katz et al., the first paper, they actually formulated the problem as an optimization problem in MILP, and they were solving that at every layer. So, and if the optimization problem is, of a reasonable size, it may be much faster to do that at each layer in parallel, because there's a lot of things that you can do with optimization, right? So I don't know how this optimization problem in this case would look like, but it would be interesting to see what the objective function they are trying to optimize it. And
so like maybe they can optimize the distance between U7 and L7, because if we have a tighter relaxations, then the distance between L7 and U7 will be lesser.
Yeah, that's correct. So they want to minimize some sort of a distance measure between L7 and U7, which is, and now what distance measure you use is up to you. Like you could use standard Euclidean distance or something different.
Right.
But the point is that can be an interesting way to solve. And we have very good, robust solvers for quadratic and linear measures. Right? Okay, good. No, this would be an interesting thing to combine with other approaches, because optimization is a tool that we can always leverage on at different times. Sometimes putting all your, I would say, everything into optimization is not a good idea, because it can lead to, sometimes you don't know how the optimization problem results would come out, given the fact if the problem is highly nonlinear. If you know it's a linear, or let's say even if it's quadratic, you have pretty much surety of your result. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Also, like there will be a lot of constraints, because with just 2 neurons, we are seeing so many
exactly. And the optimization problem might get crazy in terms of your objective function might be very simple in terms of the distance measure. But if there are too many constraints, you are actually, the problem can be what we call it as in optimization is an ill-conditioned problem, where you're, in an optimization, you call this as a C transpose X such that X is equal to B, where your A matrix in this case would be highly sparse if there are too many constraints, right? And that will cause the problem to be ill-conditioned, and not really worth solving. So there's a balance that one needs to make, but yeah, that's something interesting to investigate as well. Good, go ahead.
Okay. So yes, it's the same thing. So we propagated and populated the constraints for neurons in every layer, and we stopped here, which is our final layer. So now again, when we say that we want something as robust, so that means we want x11 is always greater than x12. So uh, ideally, if you see here, at the bounds for x11 and x12, just looking at the bounds, you are not getting what you are expecting. But again, like in this figure, just to like make things, I'm just rushing so much, sorry. So like in this figure, you are just again populating everything, and till this region, I think they back substituted. And while calculating the bounds for these neurons, they haven't back substituted, they have just used the values. So the bounds here that you are seeing here are not because of the back substitution, they just leverage the values from the previous layer. But what they're saying here is that if you again use back substitution, uh, you will get x11 minus x12 will be always greater than 0. So when we say that we want our model should always classify to x11, so this means that my x11 should be always greater than x12. So my lower bound of x11 should be greater than the upper bound of x12. And this is what we are going to, this is what we want to achieve in this. And this should happen for all inputs in this range, because this was our precondition and this was our post condition. And our x11 looked like this and my x12 looked like this. So if you use these two shapes, and then you can calculate expression for x11 minus x12, and with back propagation, not back propagation, back substitution, you will get x11 minus x12 to be 0.5, and this will prove the property. So this is a good example that even though we were using deep poly, if we are not back substituting it, we may lose the precision. So deep poly, like defining the constraints in this way with back substitution, gives you a much better result. And in practice, like deep poly is quite popular, and it's quite precise, even being incomplete method, and it's scalable too. So this is kind of end to the symbolic regions. So as a summary, we have discussed about box, Zonotope, and deep poly as an incomplete verifiers. And also we kind of looked at the complete method based on MILP formulation. And in next sessions, we'll be looking at like, can we define or can we train the models using these regions, like not using the concrete points, but using by taking all these shapes and then back propagating using all these shapes also. So one thing that I also wanted to mention apart from all these things is that not only defining these shapes is important, but another challenge lies with how you program these shapes, because when it comes to computation point of view, you need these shapes to be very efficient. And so basically this lab has produced toolboxes for everything. So there is a toolbox for verification, which they call it as ERAN. I don't remember its full form. It's something like ETH Robustness Analyzer. And there is another toolbox which is Diff AI, and Diff AI is the full form is the differentiable abstract interpretation, and they use the Diff AI toolbox to train the model. So ERAN toolbox is just to verify, it gives you the verification, but the Diff AI toolbox will give you a trained model. So when you look at the toolboxes, even though the toolbox is designed in Python, but all these shapes are designed in C or C++, because we cannot afford defining these shapes in Python because that is too slow. So what they have did is like they have designed, or they have developed a library called Elena, and in that library they have defined these shapes like Bog, Zonotope, Deep Poly, and they import these shapes into the code. So even I don't know like in depth how they do it or how the code looks like, because I haven't went through the C++ code for this figure. But then if you are interested, you can look at this this kind of these toolboxes and also the library. And also one important point, apart from the preciseness in terms of shape and everything, there is another important point in terms of precision, is that the floating point numbers, because it's not just about the shape, but we lose precision in terms of the floating point format also. So when we are implementing things, we also need to take care about the floating point formulations, and hence they in the toolbox you will observe that they import some libraries which take care of the floating point soundness, because that is very crucial when you are working with such critical certification methods. So I think that's it for this session. Professor, do you have time?
Yeah, sure. Tell me.
So like till now we have covered about all the symbolic regions, but I also wanted to discuss more about the terms that we have been always speaking about, like optimality, soundness, and automated things in terms of mathematics, because till now we just had the intuition for it.
Yeah, sure. We
So
have 20 minutes. Please do it, because I think it's a very good point that you're raising, because we understand, oh, what abstraction, but what does it actually mean? And I think it's a good idea. No, sure. We have 20 minutes. Please go ahead.
yeah, I thought you had to go.
I have to go at 11, so I have time. So we have 20 minutes.
Oh, okay, right. So okay, so this is a very interesting cheat sheet, and this is abstract interpretation cheat sheet, not AI, artificial intelligence. So this is what we have been doing till now. So we had some points, we abstracted it using some symbolic region, which is Z, and then we had some transformations that were abstract transformation, and we landed on some another symbolic shape. So the other way around, in conventional neural networks, what we do is like we work with each of the points. So we have the data point as the vectors, which are the points in this inside this region, and you apply the normal affine and ReLU or activation transformations, and you get some output, which are again some kind of vectors. So there are few terms which are important, like one is abstraction, which you know, and other thing is concretization, which is exact reverse. So concretization means like to get every point inside some region, and this is denoted by this symbol. So this is concretization. So and apart from that, yeah, I think these points we have discussed a lot. So in general, the F is the concrete transformer, but because there are a lot of points, like you cannot enumerate, because if you remember in first or second session, we have discussed about the number of points, that the number of adversaries that we can perform, and that will lead to a very large state space, data space. So that is not easy to work upon. So that's why we move towards the abstraction, and we have defined some F sharp as the abstract transformers. So this is a kind of idea about what is abstraction and what is abstract transformer and what is concretization. And now let's look at the soundness of transformers. So by soundness, what we mean here is that, so by applying the F sharp on an abstract element Z, we obtain a set of concrete values corresponding to the result. And so ideally what it is saying here is that, so whatever, if you are applying the concrete transformer over the data points here, you will end up with some region here. And your transformer is sound. When your abstract transformer is sound, then the shape that you are getting at output should completely enclose the all the points that you got through the normal transformation. So what we are saying here is that we got some points
So
in the output.
how do you prove that your abstract transformation is sound? Have they shown a theoretical proof around it? So what you're saying is a very good point. Yes, if I'm able to enclose all the possible transform points under my new transform shape, I say it's sound. But what is a theoretical proof around it, saying that there's no chance that there would be a point that is outside the abstract shape?
I don't know the theoretical proof, but like what I have understood is that so initially when you had the perturbations, you defined a shape which was precise as well as okay. Yeah, actually I'm not sure. Like even I have to look at
right, because you know what I'm saying. So you know, f is some nonlinear function. Right now, f is, since f is a non, unless you have a constraint on what f can be, you can ensure that, right? If I say f can be an arbitrary any nonlinear function, that makes it life much harder, because I can make f to be x cubed plus x squared plus x something something, and there's a highly likelihood that one of the points will be outside that bounded region, or your f sharp region will be highly relaxed. It will not be a very tighter region. Yes, you can consider that to be, you know, think of that as a page of paper, right? You have few points, but you say, okay, my region is a full page. Okay, yeah, sure, wherever it will be, I will encompass it, right? But ideally, that's not the right approach. So there has to be a proof around saying what is the constraints on either f, or there is a theoretical guarantee that you provide in terms of your transformation.
Right, makes sense. So like even like what I have understood, like what I used to think is like, so initially you had some points and you defined a proper abstract shape as the precondition, and then after all this transformation you are losing precision, which means you are over approximating it. So when you are over approximating, you are always the shape is always having more points than
okay, yeah, sure, that's correct. However, you know, when you're so you're absolutely right in some sense, but what it's again implying that there's a constraint on what f can be.
Right.
So there's a limited. So what I'm trying to say is the set of functions or transformations that you can do on those points is limited. And that will make sure that you guarantee soundness there.
Also, yes. And most probably it will be around the epsilon that we are choosing.
Absolutely. You're now,
because
exactly.
Yeah.
Now you're, yes, absolutely right. Because that epsilon is the component that actually bringing in the noise component, right? So all those points are surrounded by an epsilon sphere, let's call it, for now, an epsilon ball.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Got it.
So now your shape will be, you can think of that as, if you look at your boundary points, whatever the max transformation can happen will happen on that sphere, and then okay.
Right. We kind of discussed this in the first session.
That's okay. Good. Very nice. Good.
Yeah, got it. So yeah, this is how we define soundness. So and so now let's look at the exactness. So we say a transformer is, hello, yes. Are you saying something?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. So so we say a transformer is exact when it exactly encloses. So in this, so if you look at this figure, so this is exact transformer. but this is not because you have having extra points here. So when it is not a subset, but it is not a subset, but it is exactly equal, then we will say that the transformer is exact. So again, like I have to think about the proof on the similar thing, like how are we theoretically
So they might have
guaranteeing this?
shown it. So they might have done it in one of their papers. If you look at their papers, I'm pretty confident in, you might
Okay.
look at the supplementary material or something. They would have
Mhm.
done this proof, because without proof, it will be very hard to convince the reviewer why this is valid, right?
Right, right,
So yeah, I'm assuming they have done it. So it will be a good exercise to see how those proofs are done.
right.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. So in case of so intuitively, as we have seen in the case of Box and Zonotope, transformers are not exact for ReLU, because we always had some over approximation in case of ReLU. So we would say that they were not exact, but for affine, the Box was losing precision while the Zonotope was exact, and even deep poly is exact. So I don't remember uh, the proof in the paper, but there was a very good graphical representation depicting how the transformations were happening, and how the Zonotope was being exact in affine transformation while Box was losing precision. But yes, the proof is something that we have to look upon to solidify our statements, right? So another thing is the optimality of transformer. So we say something as optimal when there is nothing more better than the best. So so this is pretty evident what is stated here. So just to give you an example, like we say for Box, both affine and ReLU transformations are optimal, because there is no other way you can define some transformer. But in case of Zonotope, and even in case of Polytope, the affine transformation is exact and optimal, but there is no single optimal transformer for ReLU, because we looked at different shapes, and we also talked about like dynamically calculating the area, and like taking area as a heuristic uh, to calculate the final Zonotope shape. So what I'm trying to say here is like, uh, if you see here, even in case of deep poly, there were two transformations for ReLU, and there is no single best, and we can't compare each other. So that's why there is no optimal transformer for deep poly. Also, in case of Zonotope, we looked at two ReLU transformations that we can do. So there was no single best. So that's why the Zonotope and deep poly don't have optimal transformer for ReLU, but they have it for the affine. For Box, everything is optimal because we just have one option, but then they are not exact. So these terms are kind of confusing because we always interchangeably use them, optimal, exactness, but they are not same in this context. So I think, yeah, that's it from my end. And I have kind of discussed these points in this session, like we need careful math, efficient algorithms and coding for implementing these shapes. Also, we have to ensure floating point soundness, that we should not lose precision during floating point conversions and for floating point calculations. And also, it's still a good and active area of research in which people are exploring better shapes, which will be much more precise. And if we can, like someday, if we can calculate, or if we can design a complete scalable algorithm, then that will be something we should bank
That will be a
upon.
nature paper, right? So
Yeah.
that should be a nature paper if you're able to do that. No, absolutely fantastic, Abhijit, because these are very critical points and you kind of explained them really well. And I think anybody who's interested in this area should be very careful about these minute points, which are very tricky at times, and we tend to ignore them. But they are very crucial in making sure that the algorithm that you're designing is actually doing the job it's supposed to do. The results can be very deceptive at times. So don't trust your results. So for example, the last point that he mentioned is very interesting and important, because in Python, if you would be doing all sorts of, you are consuming so much time, and you're probably not even taking care of your floating point errors. That's why they actually implemented things in C, the way they have full control over things, and so you want to be very careful when you're using those toolboxes, even that you have the proper framework to be able to do it. And to be honest, I think the area is very rich. So, and the reason being, there's a ton of things that we can do in abstract transformations. Right now, the most of the work that they have done, I think, is all around ReLUs. They've not even touched anything else. Other than that, how do you do other sort of operations? They're novel. We are every day getting novel architectures.
Right.
Now, and these are only so far valid for, let's say, feed-forward kind of models. The approach so there's how can we take it forward to, let's say, different kinds of architectures, be it attention models or be it recurrent models or so on and so forth. So there's a lot of work that has to be done, and there's no thumb rule that it'll be done easily. It's a challenging field. So this is what I'm trying to say is it's an exciting area. If you're interested, you have a high chance of getting a good paper in good conferences and doing some good impact in the area of research. No, I think I am a very good job, Abhijit. It was really, really well presented, and I'm happy. So we are, as you mentioned, we are going to have one more presentation, and then what we can do is, what you could probably do is, instead of presenting, I don't think it makes sense to present the discussions what they have had, but what might be worthwhile is to highlight the discussions in some concise way, to mention what are the key ingredients that, if one wants to really investigate deep into one of those topics, should look at the discussion. Because I am understanding those discussions are more around the papers that they've published, and or the some active areas, but maybe presenting those might not be worthwhile. But what might be worthwhile is to highlight some key ingredients or key points from those discussions.
Okay. So there is one more lecture, as far as I can remember.
After that,
yeah, which is based on geometric perturbations.
Okay.
I haven't looked at that lecture, but then in the toolbox also they have provided the facility of having geometric perturbations also, because till now we are just looking at brightening attack, and we are just
that's correct. And no, so exactly. So let's start. So in the next lecture, what are you presenting?
So the next lecture is about training the models based on these regions, right. And after that, then we can plan how.
Yeah. Okay. Then let's.
Because even though they are just discussions, but they are lengthy discussions.
I know, but
they have like 4 lectures.
Okay. Yeah. Good. So let's look at those. Let's in the next time when we meet, let's discuss what are those, and then we can finalize what we want to actually take it up for. Because again, it's a very good point. What you're raising is, what kind of perturbations are affecting, and every different kind of perturbation will have a different impact on this technique. So no, that's good. So let's finish off the training part next week, and then we move on from there and see what we want to go on next.
Yeah, I'm looking at this. I think the last 2 or 3 lectures are based on the logic, combining logic and deep learning. So that will be interesting.
Yes.
And also a network interpretability and visualization. So that will also be interesting.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Good. Let's do that. Then let's continue as we are going. I want. Anubhav is not here, but he is really interested in the formal method, so he could do the logic part, I think, because he is excited about that, but he hasn't been attending very regularly. So let's see. And yeah, maybe somebody else from the group, if interested, wants to. So I know I don't want to trouble anybody before September 1st, because everybody has their own commitments before that. But if anyone is willing to take up one of those discussions, I would say, please volunteer. And it would be fun. But anyways, good. So if you don't volunteer, I'm going to force somebody. Otherwise, I will let Abhijit, our lead on this, take care of it, because he has done a fantastic job. And these videos will be very useful for everyone else to look at. and let's wind this up, and then we see where we go on from there.
Yes.
Okay. And all of you, one thing I want to mention is all the good conferences are going on these days. So KDD was, I think, is already finished or it's going on. Please try to attend those conferences if you can. They're generally, I think, free or maybe $20 registration. If it requires a $20-$30 registration for students, please tell me and I will pay for it. But all of you should attend those conferences. So all the machine learning conferences that are happening, like I know ICML finished sometime back, there might be another one. So whichever you want, let me know and I will pay for you and you should attend them. I'll keep you guys posted as and when I feel that is relevant for you guys. If you want something you want to attend, let me know. Okay. Okay, then thank you everyone. And I will see you guys next week. And well done, Abhijit. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See you. Bye.